Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Tammy Doçi. Tammy, of course, gets to work with a wonderful organization by the name of CRU, and she is an MPD coordinator, which means Ministry Partner Development, which means support raising. There's a lot of different terms out there, but basically, Tammy gets to help oversee and develop kingdom-minded workers, probably like you, the listener. She just happens to have that focus primarily with inside of the organization called CRU. So Tammy is joining me today. And Tammy, I know you've lived in a lot of different places. Are you in Chicagoland today or where are you?
Yeah. Hi, Aaron. Great to be with you. I am in Colorado Springs, and we are coming up on 3 years that we moved from Chicago to the Springs. And we absolutely love Colorado. So yeah, thankful to be here.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, since you live out there in the Springs, I know that there's some pretty epic mountain biking in that area. Do you take advantage of that, or is that more something for the tourists?
Well, it's a very popular, sport activity. My husband does some mountain biking. I'm more of a hiker. Love to explore trails and different places, but not so much on a bike.
Okay. Well, I had to ask because at the time that we're recording, I actually have a trip out that area in about a month from now. And part of my plan is to make sure I end up on a mountain bike at some point. So
that's great. Yeah, definitely worthwhile doing it when you're here. So
very cool. Well, hey, tell us, you mentioned your husband. Tell us a little bit about you and your family before we dig into some of this support raising stuff.
Yeah, sure. I have been married to Bonnie, or Alban is his full name, from Albania, because we've been married 15 years. We just celebrated our 15th anniversary in August with a wonderful, amazing week in Alaska. Highly recommend. And I served in Albania for 19 years, pretty much right after college. I went over for 2 years first, and then I went over and stayed long term. And that's where I met my husband. He was on staff with CRU for 10 years. And so we have eventually made our way here to the Springs. So that's us.
Well, that's great. So you guys are in the Springs now, and boy, you were in Albania for a long time. So were you doing campus ministry over there? What was your role then?
Yeah, you know what? Because it was a brand new ministry, I got to dabble in a lot of our different ministries within CRU, but we always, seems like our entry into a country is through campus. And so I was on campus for quite a few years, eventually ended up in developing a lot of our national staff, our Albanian staff. And so I did training, new staff training. I served on the high school team for 2 years. I served in the professionals ministries. I did a lot of work with getting a lot of our resources into the Albanian language as well. So we have an Albanian student website, and even later down the road, we partnered with Crown Financial Ministries, and we did a lot of training and stewardship, and translated their materials into Albanian. So I got to dabble in a lot.
Jack of all trades.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I think I'm more of a specialist, but yeah, I served in HR and some of the different things. But really enjoy developing staff in particular.
Very cool.
That's where my heart is.
You are a bit more of a specialist now. So, to the uninitiated, they might not understand really what it is that you do. I gave like a 3-second intro. Maybe you can give everybody kind of the 30-second explanation of what you do kind of on a macro level with inside CRU.
Yeah. So currently, I am the Ministry Partner Development Coordinator for 10 states, all the way from Alaska down to a little tiny portion of Texas, serving the campus ministry, although I do get to serve a lot of our different ministries in the support raising process. But I really see it as a developmental role of coming alongside our staff in what we would say is some of the hardest, most challenging times. I think as a missionary is that of trusting the Lord with your finances, raising support, developing a team of partners. And so I get to come alongside and equip and mentor and, point to the Lord through his word, things like that. And just ultimately launch them to their ministry assignments, whether that's a campus or whether it's to a different ministry within CRU or overseas, so it's really a joy. I get to lead a team of coaches, and then I serve on our kind of our lead team that oversees all of our ministries in the area of support raising or ministry development. So.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm glad you could be with us. And, one of the things that I'm excited about is I asked you to be thinking about helping us kind of answer a question as far as what are some common pitfalls, or, another way to say it is normal mistakes people make.
Yeah.
And you did a little bit of pre-work and asked some others for their feedback. Tell us a little bit about that and some of their responses.
Yeah, we have an amazing coaches community, so many coaches that work in this area, and I love crowdsourcing. I like to, I feel like we're so great to just jump in and sharpen one another with ideas. And so I did throw it out to, in Slack as a question, and I got a ton of responses, and so many of them I could just be like, yes, that's spot on. A few of those were, for example, having a fuzzy goal, or just not knowing, your numbers well, and why, maybe even the why behind your numbers in terms of your monthly and special needs goals.
Yeah, because if it's confusing to you, it's confusing to others, right?
Right. And if you don't really buy into why your goal is that way, it'll impact the way you ask others, or, could cause just kind of, more fear, or just, feeling inadequate, or even if then potential partners raise that question, you will lack the confidence to talk about it. So that was one. There were other responses, like not knowing your audience, like who you're sharing with. Is this, a Gen Z, but, friend, acquaintance? Is it, just kind of what generation they're in, how they like to be, how they prefer their mode of communication. That's such a challenge these days, is just there's so many ways we communicate, and every generation has different feel, and even then their city or their their ethnicity, and even some of those aspects can really play into how we might go about an appointment with them.
Yeah. Hey, in fact, just for fun, real quick, is there a time maybe someone has sat down with you and they didn't know you as their audience, and maybe they said something that, not that it was like, immorally wrong or anything, but just kind of hit a weird tone with you and kind of set you back a bit?
Oh, it's a great question. Most of our recent appointments have been with other CRU staff, other staff inviting us to partner with them. And so I do feel like there's kind of that commonality of kind of background. Nothing's coming to mind specifically, like where it was awkward necessarily,
Okay.
So, but
I just figured I'd try, because as you were saying that, there was somebody I was sitting down with a while back, and they kept calling me buddy. And I don't know, and at the time we're recording this, I'm almost 49, 50 years old. And there's something about that seems really condescending to me when someone calls me buddy.
That's a great example of just, we can make an assumption about someone, or to kind of use things that just don't relate well, right? It doesn't resonate. So that's
which is funny, because as somebody who's actually like a legit close friend of mine, I'll totally, refer to him as like a buddy of mine. That I'm fine with. But when I don't know somebody, it kind of seems like, I'm the kid brother that they're disrespecting. And maybe that's all in my own head, but when somebody says buddy to me, I think that's not them not knowing their audience a little bit. And
exactly. No, I think
some of that stuff you can't know, but some of that you can kind of pick up just by paying attention to the different cultural, generational, just the different things that are out there.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a great example of kind of help, learning about your audience, or even trying to, finding out, if you can, about the person that you are meeting with. If they're not a well-known friend, if it's an acquaintance or even a referral, it's like, how can we find out a little bit about them, and then really go in, I would say, with a kind of a listening heart and an observing one too. If you're in a face-to-face appointment, you can kind of observe and ask questions. So to kind of not stumble into some of those
Yeah. Which
awkward
we're all going to
moment.
make mistakes, right? But
Yeah, for
we
sure.
want to avoid those common, easy to make pitfalls and mistakes. So,
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or with some of the other ones, I love that you crowdsource this. I know you got
Yeah.
a bunch of great answers.
Being afraid of a no response, like the
Hmm.
reality is not everyone we will meet, is going to join our team, that God hasn't appointed everyone. And so just not being fearful of getting a no. And actually sometimes it's better to have that no, after the first appointment or even on the phone call than having to wait and wait and wait because, that person doesn't respond, so I think sometimes a no is a gift, and help
Absolutely.
move forward.
Because if somebody tells you no, they're saving you multiple follow up phone calls where
Exactly.
you're trying to figure out what they're actually saying. So yeah, it actually could be a gift when someone's just straight up honest about
Yeah.
being yes or no.
Right, right. And ultimately I think it's like a point of trust, because we're believing that God knows who's going to join our team, and so we're trusting that there's a reason why that person isn't. And we can just be confident that
Mm,
God doesn't have them for our team of partners, and that's good for them and it's good for us, and we can, trust God in that space. So yeah, I'm not being afraid of a no.
great one. That was really good. That was really good. So I know that you said you got a lot of feedback from different people, but then you also have your kind of top pitfall. So I'm enjoying this. I think you have a lot of perspective, and I think it was really wise of you to crowdsource. So at whatever point you want to like transition to like, but your top 5 or 6 are, that's great.
Sure.
But we can keep rolling with some of these other things you heard from others if you want, because I think this is all so helpful for us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for those who, I mean, I will mention this one because I just think it's really good. Is there's kind of two groups of people: those that are raising their initial support,
Hmm.
and in our organization, we have all of our new staff raised to 100% before they report to their assignment. But
Praise
then
the
we
Lord.
also have our veteran staff who, obviously, at different times in their longevity on staff, however many years that is, they need to continue to raise and trust the Lord. And obviously we both know that support comes and goes. People, there can be a lot of fluctuation during your time
Hmm.
with an organization. And so the one mistake that I thought was good to highlight is avoiding MPD or ministry partner development until you're in a crisis. And I think sometimes our new staff, it's like they join, they raise their support, it's like, oh, I'm done with this. And 5 years, 10 years later, they really haven't kept on top. They haven't had it a part of their schedule, their weekly schedule. They haven't had it as a focus. And so then suddenly they're in crisis,
Right.
and that can be really hard to get back into, like, as there's a lot of kind of those mental, emotional barriers to have to work through
Yeah,
because of
for
being
sure.
in crisis mode. So I thought that was another good one because
That is good. Plus, it's
just
just the rhythm. And
using
when
it.
it's been a long time, you can have a hard time finding your rhythm again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Well, it is. We provide, one of the responsibilities I've had is we provide what's called MPD Reconnect, or Ministry Partner Development Reconnect. It's a summer, anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks with our veteran staff, according to their ministry, kind of doing ministry partner development in community with one another. Now, they're all in different locations, but we meet weekly, we encourage one another. And the heart is that they're reconnecting with their partners. They are raising additional support, new support, but it's done in community with one another. But what we see is that sometimes just re-engaging with it can take several weeks. You have to kind of go back to the basics. You have to really renew your mind with, scripture, and it can just, that momentum, it takes a lot more to get into,
Mhm.
because if it hasn't been an ongoing priority.
Mhm.
And we just have those barriers, within our own, flesh, so to speak.
Oh,
It's
for
just,
sure. For
you
sure.
know, trying to get
Sometimes
back into
we
it.
can be our own worst enemies. Not that we have like evil intent against ourselves or the Lord, but sometimes just our own. It could be work ethic, but maybe it's not work ethic. Maybe it's time management. Maybe it's
Yeah,
not time
exactly.
management. It's space. Like we need to go and sit down and be in an office away from others, but we're used to being with people and we're not actually. I mean, it can be all sorts of reasons that sometimes aren't very deep. They're just matters of organization and self time management. But yeah, we can really prevent ourselves from moving forward, even if we have had a previous history of being quote unquote successful in building a partnership team. So that all plays in. So that's a really good point on your part.
Yeah. And, and sometimes it might just be kind of a negative experience the first time around, and that just then colors, like it somehow is a hindrance then to really wanting to re-engage, not, a person will have raised their support, but maybe it just took a really long time, or, they have a lot of bad connotations with that time in their life. And so that could also, it's just hard to want to go back into those those waters of, support raising that were difficult and challenging. And, I see that MPD is one of for me, I've been on staff, I'm entering my 29th year with CRU. And so I've been doing this for a long time. And
you've been doing it since you were 5 years old. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly, Aaron. I grew up with, this, but I see that MPD is one of the most, in my life, it's one of the times that I am having to be most dependent on the Lord, and that, in a real tangible way, where I just really, because it just, there's a lot of fears that pop up and a lot of lies I begin to wrestle with anyway. But so that dependency, it's a really good thing. It's a sweet thing, but it's sometimes uncomfortable,
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh, good points. Good points. Well, as you process through this out, I know that you kind of had some primary points that you want to dig into as far as, pitfalls you have seen through, quite honestly, through years of not just living this and doing this, but really helping to oversee hundreds of others, maybe even thousands of others. So let's jump into, let's call this Tammy's top 6 pitfalls, if you will.
Okay.
So Tammy's top 6. And by the way, once again, we don't pre-rehearse everything, but I do encourage the guests for the SRS podcast to kind of bullet point out a couple of general ideas that I know where they want to go, because I like being the host, not the driver of the conversation. And so, Tammy, thank you for sharing me some of your bullet points in advance. But yeah, let's jump into your top 6 pitfalls that most, maybe not most, but are very common for support raisers to make. So take it away, my friend.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the first one, I think this is just kind of one of my heartbeat passions, but it's not viewing support raising MPD as ministry. But rather seeing it as a means to an end, or kind of like, I have to do this and then I start my ministry, whatever ministry that is. And so, the reason I think I'm so passionate about this one is that it was a game changer for me about 7 years ago. And this is after I'd come back from Albania and was needing to raise quite a bit of support. For one reason, not really having raised a whole lot. I had raised for Albania, but then kind of my focus became helping Albanians raise their support. And I was in a good place and just didn't really have anyone kind of encouraging me in that area of like, hey, how's your support doing? And so, and then coming back in the States, the cost of living, just things like that. I had a chunk of support to raise. And this shift in my perspective just made that. So I took about 8 weeks to dive in to my support. And I had a coach. I was thankful. One of my colleagues coached me during that time, which was amazing. It was such a great, even though I'd been coaching for a year myself, so I knew the principles. It made such a difference to have a coach with me. But this mindset, seeing it as a ministry, changed everything.
Yeah.
In terms of that time.
Yeah. By the way, Michael Jordan knew how to play basketball better than anybody's ever played basketball, and he had a coach, right? So just because you know how to do something doesn't mean that you have all the perspective. You have
True.
your perspective, and so
right.
Yeah, having a coach is helping you have that ministry partner developed and seeing it as ministry, and your coach owns that as well. That's just wise. So that's a great one.
Yeah, it was really a great experience because when I first raised support, we didn't really have as much coaching set up at the time. Now, of course, that was 29 years ago. So it looked very different than we do today. But having this mindset, just really took the pressure off that season took the pressure off of looking at the money piece. I really focused on how can I bless others? How can I envision them with what God is doing in the world? How I get to, we see in Philippians 4:17 that Paul has this incredible perspective. I don't seek the gift itself, but the profit that increases to your heavenly account. And it's really how can we bless others by inviting them into the Great Commission and God's kingdom and the beauty of generosity, and then even just the personal relationships, seeing even with people that maybe weren't going to join my team, could I be praying for them? Could I pray for them on the phone? That's how can I love and encourage them in every interaction, and it really made it a sweeter time for me, too, as opposed to just this time of fear or, exhaustion or whatever. I saw this as this great opportunity to develop relationships and, do ministry. It was part of my ministry. And that's really, it's really impacted me moving forward too.
Great. Yeah. Just a brief sidebar here to our listeners. Perhaps you've wanted to recruit someone to your staff team, but aren't sure how to broach the topic of support raising without either scaring them away or shoving a full copy of the God-ass book into their hands. So wouldn't you like an 8-page booklet that might calm their fears and quickly unpack the basic how-tos from a practical and biblical perspective? We actually have a booklet like that. It's called The 5 Keys to Support Raising, and you can get these booklets in English or in Spanish at cmmpress.org. You'll receive an additional 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast. All right, I'll keep it going because you're on a roll.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. So the second one, I just kind of framed it as another pitfall is listening to the accuser instead of our advocate. And so listening to the accuser, Satan, in terms of lies about God, about ourselves, even about others that we're interacting with, instead of resting and listening to our advocate, Jesus, who intercedes on our behalf. And so it kind of goes down to just having our identity rooted in Christ. I just believe it's a foundational point. We see that Jesus, before he began his earthly ministry, he heard from the Father this, at his baptism, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased, and I think that having that foundational identity is so key because I do think that the enemy is going to do everything he can to try and distract us, discourage us. I mean, he doesn't want us on the front lines in ministry, and so, I see that as just being so foundational is we are secure, accepted, and significant in Christ. And so we don't need the approval of others, Yeah. And I think even as we were talking about before, receiving no's, that sometimes can, I think a lot more about the no's than I do about the yeses. Unfortunately, those are the ones I remember, but
right.
Yeah, this really plays into that.
So is there, you sound like you're talking from personal experience here. Is there maybe a lie or an accusation from the devil that you've just found yourself wrestling with at some point during your time on staff with CRU? Because I think sometimes having a practical example kind of proves to everybody that Tammy and Aaron are not the experts that know everything, but we're real people who make real mistakes that deal with lies and temptations and all sorts of stuff as just like everybody else. So do you have something like that?
Yeah, I'll share mine if then you share yours. So, one, back at that time, 7 years ago when I was raising support, again, I'd been coaching others. I had seen God provide like for different couples and singles, just in amazing ways. That first year I was an MPD coach. And so here I am starting this 8 weeks of, I'm going to trust you, Lord. I've got X number of dollars to raise. And I really began to wrestle with, did the Lord want to provide fully for me? And so I kind of dug into that and just realized my questioning was, does the Lord really love me? It kind of went deeper into what was God's view of me and what was his care and provision for me ultimately? Connected to that was, and this was where my coach was super helpful at the time. But I also was kind of wrestling with this idea of not believing I was worthy of the wages. I had more of kind of poverty scarcity mentality. And I just was really, I had to be convinced that like, yeah, this God has called me to this, and he wants to provide fully for me, just as he has for all these other missionaries I've been coaching.
Mm.
And so those were kind of where I was wrestling. But how about you, Aaron? What have you struggled with?
Of course, now I do get to do some global work, and through Exago and or through SRS, I get to spend some time overseas, just equipping ministry leaders and sometimes organizations and stuff with just practical ministry steps, be that be support raising or something different, like kind of member care coaching type things. But years ago, when I would say 99% US based,
Uh-huh.
I was kind of the opinion that maybe I didn't deserve it, like because I didn't have a zip code or a
Yeah.
foreign mission field address,
Right.
and then that got actually affirmed by people that should not have been affirming it, and so I think I kind of walked in that a little bit, and then it was a buddy. Now here you go. I said buddy because he's actually a good friend, right? It was a good friend of mine that
Yeah.
just called that out at one point, and
Hmm.
I don't even think he realized how significant that was at the time,
Yeah.
where he basically said, "Hey, just because you live in Arkansas and I live in Africa doesn't mean you're like a substandard missionary. Like
Right.
I couldn't be doing the work I'm doing so well if you weren't investing in me.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is key and you're not second rate. Like stop
Right.
acting like it." I mean, that's
Yeah.
really kind of what he said. And I needed that. Yeah, I had to get over that lie because the devil kind of figured out that was a good lie to use against me. And it was coming at me. And I knew I had finally overcome that when it wasn't too many years later. I actually had a pastor at a local church in the area in which I live suggest to me that I am a second class missionary because
Mhm.
of that. And I was confidently, kindly, lovingly able to kind of push that back in his face. Again, I was really kind
Yeah.
about it. And I said, so
Sure.
I'm not really in missions based on my zip code. Is that? And he, like, it stunned him when I said that. And he ended up having a real change of heart and mind. Like it wasn't that moment, but he came back to me later on and said, you know what? I was getting that wrong. I want to apologize.
Yeah. Wow.
So it definitely was something that I'll say it kind of disabled me from walking forward in the confidence of who I am and who God called me to be for a time, because
Right.
I wasn't just like hearing that lie. I was believing that lie, and it was
Right.
hurting.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I can relate somewhat to that because when we moved from Albania, and Albania is like in the mission field. I mean, one of the most spiritually open nations. I mean, God has just done amazing things there, in terms of, a former communist isolated country. And then coming back to the States where I was going to be continuing to serve, I had that similar, kind of wrestling. One, would my partners continue with me? Do they still see, I'm no longer overseas? And I actually had a church, shift their, because I was returning, even though I was still in missions and doing ministry full time, they shifted their, removed their support from me. And that was hard. I had to kind of like, I had to really, again, agree with the Lord, like, no, Lord, this is what you've called me to. And now I have a US zip code. And what does that mean? How can
Oh,
we,
that means Jesus
so
doesn't love you as much, right?
yeah, so but I appreciate that because a lot of, so many of our missionaries, that you coach and that I coach are here serving in the US. And I think you're right. We need to see it as, reaching all nations and all,
Right.
even those that are in administrative roles, right? Like how
Right.
do they, raise support to the glory of God? It's, they're just as essential
Yeah.
as the ones that are kind of boots on the ground in the field and,
Yeah.
different places, so
Good stuff. Good
that's
stuff.
really good. Yeah, it kind of leads me to our next one, you know, which is so easy for us to do when you're in that time of support raising is the pitfall of comparing your support raising journey to that of others.
Hmm.
And so,
It's
the
not one size fits
comparison
all, is
game,
it?
I'm sorry.
It's not one size fits all, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we move towards comparison and, it can feed then some of those lies and our questions about ourselves, our worthiness, our calling, et cetera. And and just everyone is, I've coached so many people to know that every journey, will look different, and God wants to do different things in different people's lives. I see kind of support raising as a gift of transformation and refining. Like I was saying earlier, it's just one of those places that we are so dependent on the Lord, and we don't know how He wants to develop us or develop the fruit of the Spirit, in that season, because we're doing a lot of, everything we do needs, requires us to take steps of faith, and so that timeline of what it will look like will be different, and everyone comes from a different background. A gal I'll be coaching this fall, her church is 6 members, so I think it's just a couple families. So that's going to be different than someone who's going to a church that's made up of, several thousands.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, keep rolling. We got to keep going. This is good stuff, and we're gonna get this all in the one podcast, and I think people are gonna appreciate
it. Well, good. Yeah. The pitfall number 4, probably one of my favorites to focus on, like just in my current coaching, is this one of not believing the best in others, especially those that we're inviting to be a part of our ministry. And it's kind of the opposite of, I would say, or kind of the correlation of that is, how do we love others in the gap?
Okay. What do you mean by the gap?
Yeah. So support raisers, I think, will understand this. I call the gap as that space of time between when I initiate, whether by texting, calling, emailing, messaging, sending a TikTok video. I haven't done that yet, but any sort of initiation with a potential partner, acquaintance, friend, referral. That gap is that time from when I do that and then when I hear back from them or get a response.
Okay.
And that gap, that silence.
It's that waiting time, right?
The waiting time. Yeah. It can be 5 minutes. It might be 10 days. It might be 3 months. There might be a non-response, and so in our minds, I feel like even just a day or two can feel like eternity, in our thoughts. And then I've had people who said they would join my team, but then they never started giving. So, it's how do I believe the best and not make any assumptions in that gap, in that space of time.
Yeah.
And so the temptation, I think, for each of us is to jump to all sorts of conclusions. I know immediately I'll have kind of some story narratives in my mind, or the enemy will whisper lies as to why they aren't responding. And so it can be a crazy maker. I love quotes. I like to collect quotes, but there's a quote from a marriage book by John Eldredge. It was called In Love and War. And he has a quote about speculation. And of course, it's applied in the area of marriage, but I've really seen this true almost in every relationship, whether it's a team relationship or, a friend or a family member. But the quote is this: it says, "Speculation is the playground of the enemy." So, and what that conjures up in my mind is kind of like, I don't know, back in the day there, I don't know if they are still around, the merry-go-rounds, in a playground, or a carousel, those things that spin, Yeah. So I think if you jump on it, you spin and spin and spin until you're like wobbling and maybe you get a little bit nauseous and stuff. But I kind of feel like that's what happens in our minds when there's that silence or that gap of communication, and we start our minds cycling all these reasons. Well, oh my gosh, maybe our relationship isn't as strong as I thought it was, or gosh, should I, am I reaching out too much? Sometimes we're like, am I a burden to them?
Right, am I overwhelming them?
All sorts of lies. And I find that, choosing to believe the best and to not fill that gap with assumptions is really key,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that term, believing the best, because I think sometimes, quite honestly, we we might be having a bad day, or somebody might have said something different, and we kind of, we pull that into this conversation that it might be unrelated, but it's already, for whatever reason, it's kind of a cloudy, rainy day in a not good way in our own head and heart, and all of a sudden we're jumping to conclusions, and that's very different from saying, hey, I did the best I could. I invited that person to be a part of my team. I need to follow up with them.
Right.
The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue was from the Lord. So I'm giving this to God, and I'm praying. Like there's a completely different posture that we don't need to be defeated, so to speak. We don't need to walk in the brokenness when we invite somebody to be a part of our team. I like that term, the gap. That gap really can be a time of trusting the Lord and prayer and being hopeful. Exactly. Even if that person says no, ultimately, we can still be hopeful. God is at work. I am in process. He is in process, regardless of this person's ultimate decision.
Yeah, I love that, because what's true, what I've found is that I start praying for those people and I really want to pray for, God to be at work, not even just related to, support or joining my team, but just whatever God is doing in their lives. And I find like that's one way I can love them by faith. I might, if they never join my team, then I might not be praying for them down the road. But in that space, I get to pray for them. I get to love on them. I get to just believe the best. A lot of times, especially just there's so much going on in our lives, and there could just be, major drama happening, and there's good reason why they're not responding. And so it's just really trusting God, and giving them the benefit of the doubt. And then, like you said, just, the Lord knows what he's going to do in that, but we get to love them in that space and believe the best, and not allow our assumptions to go crazy, or, or jump on that carousel of speculation, so which actually kind of leads to another practical one.
Okay. Hey, let me jump in real quick, because I realize we've both mentioned coaching a few times, and I don't like to let that hang out there and let people be confused. So, Support Raising Solutions doesn't actually offer support raising coaching directly. It does offer the boot camp. It's great. I'm big fans. I get to lead it oftentimes. But coaching is something different. Most people that I know who are fully funded have had a support raising coach at some point. Not everybody, but just about everybody. And CRU does a great job. They actually have some internal mechanisms and things set up so that wonderful people like Tammy can make sure everybody who needs to raise support has a coach. Not every organization has that, though. And so if you were to try and call Tammy and ask her to coach you, I'm guessing at some point she would be overwhelmed rather quickly, because her focus is CRU. I work with Exago, exago.org. We do offer a third-party support raising coaching. It is possible. It is a paid-for service, but you might not need that. You might know somebody who's fully funded from your organization who can coach you, or maybe your organization has a person. I guess my point is, I think Tammy and I both really value this idea that when you're raising support, you need to do learning and training, but actually coaching as well. And we're both big fans, and we think it helps people. But you might have a little, as a listener, you might have a little homework to do to figure out who is going to coach you. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case there was any confusion for people, Tammy, before we got on. I know you had a couple practical steps left. So let's go ahead and segue towards those. And thanks for letting me jump in right there.
Yeah. Well said. I echo that. And just the role of a coach is just, I see it as essential, so.
Great. Thank you.
So one, moving to two practical kind of pitfalls. The first one is not setting aside a full Sabbath day of rest each week.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what's challenging about being, raising support full time in that period that you're focusing on that is, every week looks different, and, schedule, depending on how your wiring is, your personality is, that can be a good thing, if you're really spontaneous, but it also can be really challenging for those who like to have like a 9-to-5 schedule, or, blocking things off and stuff. But the Sabbath day, it's one of the things we emphasize with our new staff is to have one full day that they take off each week.
Yeah.
And that time of support raising I was in, I found that to be so beneficial, and
It's huge. It's
yeah,
huge. You don't suddenly go to the point and go, well, I'm working for Jesus, therefore I don't need a day of rest. So God took a day of rest and you're
right.
not better than him. Maybe you need to rethink that one, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you're in that space of support raising, it's like it's hard to take a break from it.
It
It's
is.
kind of like
It's all
you have.
consuming, and it almost has to be all consuming. And yet it can be pretty hard to take that break. I agree.
Yeah. And so when we do set aside, and I recommend a full day, I know sometimes people will say, I'll do a half day or 2 half days, but I think there's a benefit to just saying it's really an aspect. I think it is an aspect of trusting God. Like, can we trust that God is at work, that he's still about the business, he's working people's hearts and minds, and, maybe in just ways we don't see, but we get to really choose to trust him and rest, in that space. And what's been fun to see just over the years as I've coached different people and even in my own life, some, different points is sometimes it's in that day off that, someone else that we've reached out to, had an appointment with, sets up their giving. It's like, it seems like sometimes there's just little sweet surprises from God that
It's
kind
like
of
God's
honors
working even when you're not.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, just the importance of good soul care during that season of MPD. What is it that recharges you, refreshes you,
Yeah.
body, mind, soul, spirit, relationally, intellectually, all of that. And so,
a couple quick ideas with that too, if I can just
please.
fully
Love
agree with what you just said. Sometimes a lot of people, I was one of these, they'll take that full day off on a weird day. Like I'm pretty sure either my wife and I, we did it during that main support raising season. It was either Monday or Tuesday. And the reason that we did it was super spiritual. It was half price movie day at the theater. And so
that's perfect.
But I just knew that when I was support raising, most of the people I was going to be interacting with, I needed to talk to them on the weekends. And so I wasn't going to get a day off on the weekends and be maximizing my time. And so, I would do Sabbath usually on a Monday or a Tuesday. But just recently, Tammy, someone was telling me that they would do a 6 to 6 thing where they would support raise and, they would do their work all they could up until 6 o'clock one day. And then they would do a 24 hours off. And then they would pick it back up at 6 o'clock the following evening so that if there were any messages or things that came in, they could kind of be handling everything within a 24-hour period. And it didn't seem quite so dramatic. I don't know. I'm not recommending that. It's just an idea I heard. I think I preferred having a full day where, I go to bed not thinking about it 2 nights in a row, have one full day off. But that's kind of up to each person. And we'll just say this, be spiritually healthy. And if God's telling you to do it one way, do it that way. You don't have to do it the other way. But at the end of the day, you are made for work. Yeah, but you're also made for rest. And you don't suddenly outgrow that because you're a missionary. Right, Tammy?
Exactly. Yeah. Amen to that. Yeah, I agree. It's just, it's so essential. And I think, it really helps us not, kind of take a break and let our minds reset and rest in the Lord. And and it allows the support raising process to be more life-giving. It's like, how can I do good soul care? In a way there's, and you might have extra time, there might be more time than you're used to. Right. And so it's like, how do I make the most of it? But how do I build into my schedule, my times with the Lord, a full day off, exercise, activity, community with others, things like that aren't
dating your spouse if you're married. That's kind of a big one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. All of that. So,
yeah.
And then the final one, just moving to number 6, a pitfall, and this is kind of really practical, is in the area of referrals. And so it's not asking for referrals on your initial support appointments.
So a lot of people think that I know everybody I'm ever going to need to know. I don't need to ask for referrals. But what we found is most people that are fully funded, at some point they started asking for referrals, whether that's initial support appointments or maybe they circled back to people later on. But I just don't know anybody that got away from it and said, "Oh, I never needed referrals at all. I'm fine. I'll just never need it," and I never did. I don't know anybody like that. Do you?
Right. No, I don't. Yeah, you're right. I don't. Unless for some reason they're fully funding themselves, like they're on their own dime for, being in ministry, which, maybe that large inheritance or something can help with that. But
That's a different pitfall podcast. I don't think that's usually probably such a great idea, but we'll talk about that some other time.
yeah, exactly. That's not really where most of us are, right? So
Right.
actually, Aaron, my team of ministry partners who I just absolutely am so thankful for today, more than 50% that are on my team were people I had never met before, didn't know. They were referrals. And
Wow. Yeah.
what I love about referrals is that sometimes it's the sweetest place to see God at work, because it's kind of mind-boggling. Like how is the Lord bringing this person who I don't know, who they are, and he aligns them to join with me. And, it's like, it's just a God connection, or, sometimes we call them divine appointments. And so for me, it's kind of, it adds a little adventure to the support raising process, is really trusting the Lord for new people and referrals that will join with us. And then, of course, they become just beloved friends and ministry partners in that process. But, it is starting. So often it's like we have our friend group, our acquaintance group, and we're like, oh, the Lord's going to raise it through these people. Well, that may not be the case, as you and I both know. And so we need to be about inviting people from the very start. And actually, it's kind of one of the ways we're inviting them to partner with us. Within CRU, our training, we help our staff think they're inviting people to partner in 3 ways, through their generosity, through their prayers, and through opening the door for us, making connections on our behalf.
Yeah.
Because they're then playing a role that they are allowing others to be connected to the kingdom. And so it's really passing on that blessing and stuff too.
For sure. So. Hey, case in point, my chairman of my board of directors for Exago, 4 years ago, from the time we're recording this, I didn't know him. I never met him. And a different supporter invited me to pop in on their community group at church. And so I popped in. I did not give a full presentation. I gave a 5-minute, here's how God uses Exago to equip ministry leaders to survive and thrive. I'm not even sure if I mentioned Support Raising Solutions, that we partner with them or not. I just said, here's what it is. And then afterwards, that community group leader gave me everybody's name and phone number. And I called him. And I wanted this guy. I called him and I just said, hey, thanks for letting me pop in on your group. Would you like more information? I could love to share with you, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah. And lo and behold, a guy that I never knew, and would not have known otherwise, given our flow of our lives and our orbits.
Right.
We connected. In fact, we're good buddies now. He's, like I said, he's chairman of my board of directors. And if you would have told me when I was first starting to raise support that I was going to have to meet new people, I wouldn't have believed you at all, Tammy. I was a youth pastor for years. Like I felt like I knew like hundreds, if not thousands of people. But the reality is most people really do. You end up asking, I guess, what are called strangers at the time,
right,
to be a part of your team. And what a blessing that ends up being. Like, I love that guy to death now. I love that he's on my board, but it started through a referral.
Right. Yeah. What a great example of that, just and how God brings and, people to our teams of ministry partners, and just connects us. It's amazing, and sometimes those referrals go, several people deep, right? Like it is kind of an awe, what God does through that. And so it's really a priority. It needs to be a priority in our support raising process. So those are kind of the 6.
Yeah, it is a pitfall to think you don't need that. You'll find out at some point you do need referrals. So there's no need to put that off indefinitely. So I think that was a great way to round out your list. So
yeah. Well, and I will say it's harder to go back to people than when you're in the appointment, whether that's a Zoom appointment or face-to-face. You can go back to people because those people are for you. They're on your team. They want you to, be in the field full time, but it is harder. There's just a lot more barriers. It's just sometimes, it can be much more challenging. And so I think, when the vision is fresh and you're on the appointment, you're able to communicate and kind of walk through maybe hesitations in that place, it's a lot easier. And
Good
so
stuff. Well, this has been one of our longer episodes, but it's been really good, Tammy. So I am so thankful for you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. And what I'd like to do is it's kind of my thing is to invite the guest to give the final words of wisdom. So any final summary thoughts before we close up our time today? And again, thank you for being a part.
Yeah. So, hey, it's been really fun, Aaron, just to talk about these things. I know there's a lot more pitfalls. I guess ultimately kind of my little nugget is just to see this time of support raising as a walk of faith and seeing it as a tool in God's hand to develop greater dependence. So really seeing the process and each person we meet as a gift in our lives. That's kind of how I maybe sum it up. And then as we avoid those 6 pitfalls, but
yeah, great.
That's it, I think, for now.
Well, that's great. Thank you again. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Okay, great to be with you, Aaron. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.